I've noticed there's a lot of yew trees in this woodland, which reminds me of the legend of the forest of the yew and the fairy folk. And this dark wood had survived the onslaught of the longbow and the destruction of the yew trees, mainly due to the locals being very cautious of this place, as it was said to be the haunt of the fairy folk. And in the centre of the wood, the greatest yew of them all was said to spread its branches over a fairy circle they called the dancing ring. Now, way back in the midst of time, two farmhands were doing some work in the woodland on a cold winter's day, when the weather seemed to mysteriously change rather quickly. The skies grew darker and a mysterious thick fog arose. So the two lads assumed it was time to head home, and they started to retrace their steps through the woodland. And after a while they came across a great yew tree in the clearing in the middle of the wood. And the air was now still and calm, and the mist had lifted, and the tree's berries gleamed red and bright. And the two men realised they had been a bit hasty. It was not so late after all, and it was too early to head home now, so they sat with their backs against the great yew's gnarled trunk and dozed off. After some time had passed, Tom, who was the oldest of the blokes, woke and looked around, but his mate Lenny had gone. And Tom was baffled, as this was not like Lenny. He guessed he'd gone home already. So Tom walked back alone to his village in the twilight. And when he was asked where Lenny was, he said he had no idea. He said he'd come back earlier. But the next morning, he was still not here. And Tom was questioned about the previous day, and he had to confess about the nap under the great yew tree. So Tom and a handful of villagers set out to search the woods and the surrounding area for signs of Lenny. They searched for a couple of days on and off with no sign of his mate at all. So Tom was now really concerned. So he decided to visit the old crone who lived on the outskirts of the village and to ask her advice. When he told her the story, she gave a look of concern, and the old wise woman said there was only one thing he could do. Go to the last place she had last seen Lenny, the dancing place. And it got to be exactly 1 year to the day and the time it was last seen. But she warned Tom not to step into the fairy ring, or you'll be lost. And when you see him come out and start to dance, snatch him out as soon as you can and bring him home. 1 very long year later, Tom was waiting, and he was stood near the great yew, but not in the fairy ring. A light rain pattered on the dark green fronds of the yew. Merry music started from somewhere below ground. And suddenly Lenny appeared, dancing madly with the fairy people underneath the tree. They were no higher than his knee in the whirling shadows of brown and gold and green. And Tom took a deep breath, stepped forward, and grabbed his hand and pulled him clear. And immediately the two of them flew back and landed hard on the forest floor. And instantly the music stopped. And when Tom looked at Lenny, he saw he was a thin, pale heap of skeleton, with little energy, and he had no idea whatsoever what had happened to him over the past year. Tom got him back to the village as soon as he could, and the villagers had a feast for him. Eventually Lenny recovered his strength and put some weight on, but he could never remember that year with the dancing fairies.